Where's the camera? Oh, never mind. Yeah, I'm sure that we haven't. Relation. You should be Mahar.
I'm sorry?
You should be Mahar. Much better. Much better. I saw the difference. The camera difference. Different world.
You were using this camera.
The camera's a bit
Better. Different world. Wow.
Why is it saying the verb instead of
He doesn't take any.
I think he's on his way.
No, it should be
Probably, yeah, I just want to pick up a package like in the area before I came. So I left early. Yeah, he moved in Pesach. And Rafi's in Givat and Shmuel.
Rafi will be here.
I'll have to take coffee. Oh, I have your card. Yeah, I do. That's what.
But Kobe's not coming.
No, he is. He's just left his way back.
It's weird. I have to type
Wow. Where'd you find that?
in the window in the store in the Mila.
Wow.
These.
Thanks so much. Pleasure. Oh, thanks for the reminder.
לברך אלוהינו שכרנו משלום.
Everybody. It's not our minhag, but I'll be happy to. The other Levi says I should do this. Just you had such like Kalem Balabais and several of them, Bababi, still Bachon Hassab. You know, some who Sachim Bekabim Leer by Shlok Satan Bemasa Yedel. I used to kick the Naf Shum Dvarachin, Bear Oven, Metabi of the law. Rachamani Berg, the Shulchan Shachana Bisedemo, Kolma de Ulam Yek, Shukno Shalvamavinu. Call red Miminu Havachotsa Miministe, Bayaksa Miminu Kotov, the Adam Mel Mimame. Rachamani Berg is Balas News, who be Ishta of a Holishal Bamanim, Nachasim, Rachanai Halo for Yadaptir said, which is the Bracha to Levi. Help me. Weiß the cake Lola von der Schum war hier hat beaven sus smech was bekhab mit tab nam lebosh mit nam zevel ikelem nam ba main can you answer that's not been Moshe ben Yamin Yes.
Thank you, Gabby. What happened to Kobe? So quiet. That's not like you, Kobe.
Based up on my energy and share.
You know what happened to my phone? No shit.
Wow, that was great. How did it change to Arabic? What did it
Change to Arabic is easy.
Yeah. Oh, the language is. Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
Very nasty Arabic.
Backfired. Show you all. Yeah.
You have cash to take a cab?
Morning came down, but
You want it?
moved to Johannesburg when I was 9. Oh, really? Wow. Oh, really? Oh, wow. Which show were Brilliant. Yeah. You know the toilets? Classic.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm so glad you could come. How long are you going to have to go already? Okay, but at least you could come. Right, that's wonderful. Scott?
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Sorry you can't stay.
Bye-bye, see you.
Anyway.
As long as I got mine, it's fine. Love their good. That's good. That's not it. Yeah, I have.
We have a holiday place in Mossel Bay. Yeah, it's like
I don't know who wrote it.
If it's okay, we should start. Yeah, he's good. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're ready to start. Dessert we're going to have later.
It's here already.
Oh, the dessert's here already.
Yeah, look.
Everybody out there can eat any dessert.
Yeah.
So now.
I was going to start, but now. Oh my gosh. Pity all you guys out there. No. Yeah. No, it's just people can see the going on, so I don't want to be the object of everyone's watching how I'm eating.
It's 20 hours.
No, do something with that. But put it somewhere where people can watch what's going on. They'll understand why we're still not starting. A little bit. Wow. Well, it looks like I have plenty of time to start dessert.
Yeah.
I got that new mic you recommended. I got that new mic. It looks like something.
Oh, you ordered that?
I have it.
Oh, it's here now?
No, it looks like something out of the 19th century.
Really?
hopefully, with that size comes some.
Like we say, size does matter.
Yeah, let's see.
We hope. Well, it contains a preamp, so you could do all kinds of
Description was
things.
very positive, and the reviews were very positive.
Yeah. I didn't want to start fooling with it now, so I didn't bring it.
Oh, but it's here already.
We have it in the issue.
Great.
I figure if we ever get you over to do some work, we'll make that part of the experiment.
We talk tomorrow, bro. I'm gonna touch on that soon.
Have to install the new parallels in the operating system. Baruch atah Where's she over? Oh, she's just starting out?
No, she's coming from the
Oh, yoga.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm tired. I'm sorry, but we didn't have enough time. Didn't have enough time to cook some stuff. That's true. Just blanket's great. Try some of the strawberries and cream. It's really good.
I told her to make me a plate of cream and to go find it in the
She'll be up.
Till 9 what?
Tell Nani because I heard the best it would be up. Tell Nani that she should know where to look for it.
I'll tell us to give it to her. I'll tell us to give it to her. I find the building somewhere. There's signs outside. And maybe they're so classy. Signs.
It's honorable Lafasi property. On right.
So classy.
I'm sure they gave me pretty solid. Don't their building. Pretty solid.
Is there any back down their address? Is that your house?
You don't know an address?
Oh, yeah?
I was looking up on the phone, but I don't know how to spell wallet.
You know, the one we do put out the variety of stuff. It's also good.
Yeah, it says
What?
a lot of times, like, you have to put them all in a bottle. Yeah, yeah, especially travel, you be able to share bottles.
It works out very well. Where else would you expect to find out the code except Dota? Junk and garbage and just everything. Getting on your computers. I need to start. It's really getting very like best me. Call everyone to attention.
Last year, this year,
I'm sorry, you know what? This people do something.
No.
I agree. Doesn't matter. Today. Beginning is the same. Beginning is the same. It's not a free.
Right now we're scheduled to do that.
I think you are very much.
it's just the side of Cushios, but you can sit in a chair.
Yeah. It's one of those years, because it would be in the States.
I'm trying. We're losing viewers by the droves. And they see all this good food, they're going out to buy chocolate. You know, I'll eat it later. You know, the Gemara asks, why is it that we don't have Chamei Tveria in Yerushalayim? It says if we have Chamei Tveria in Yerushalayim, it's people would come up, go to the base of Mikdash, and everybody would say, if we just came for the Chamei Tveria, it was Kedai. What a bizoyim. So I thought I had this Gevaldik shir, and people would come for the shir. Now I understand. We make a shir in Moshe and Esti's house.
It's the dessert.
The test is the people leave an hour the next day. That's the test.
I don't know. Maybe that's why they have to have a special chiyuv lina.
The eyes of.
I'm showing up on the screen.
Anyway, I would like to thank our marvelous hostess. And mention what a gentlemen, we're trying to begin. And even the president.
Make sure looks like it.
It's a tremendous chus, especially just finishing Masechet Sotah. To describe all of the terrible losses, just be able to be in a place like this, Yerushalayim HaKadosh, finishing up Zois Chanuka, and being zeicher to see Yerushalayim b'Vinyana. You should be zeicher to lirais b'tuv Yerushalayim kol yemei chayeichem. You should be zeicher to see with you in Binyan Shalom. Of course, Chanukah is the beginning of the tikkun of all of the choshech with which Masechet Sotah actually ends in great and horrifying detail of the gradual descent into choshech with each generation's loss. And Baruch Hashem, we're witnessing some of that rebirth. You'll notice that the end of the Masechet is remarkably connected to Hanukkah. Stories are established, the Chashmonaim, the breakdown of the Chashmonaim afterwards into Machlokas themselves, the issues of Yavan, Chochma Yavanis, Loshen Yavanis, and the Kakonas of Yochanan Kohen Gadol, who according to the Gra is actually one of the Tzaim of Yochanan, of Matisyahu ben Yochanan Kohen Gadol. So it's a retzep from the Moshe Chanukah. And amazingly, the daf opens, the closing daf of Sota, today's daf that we just finished, opens with the pasuk from Neirei Zechariah in the Haftarah, and drushes of what that means to it later on. And the truth is that it has a great deal, apparently, to do with our parshios as well. The parshios of Chanuka throughout Merumas Kan in many, many different ways. We have all of the inyanim here about Yosef, and the events of Yosef, and Meshes Potifera, the difference between Liotima, Lishkaveta, Liotima, the Alamazen, Alamabon, and it's Malafafto, Masid Lavo, and we have the different stories about Tamar, and the idea that it's mutav to be mapilat tzipkalakiv shana eish, and the question of why it is that we tell the sotah dvorim she'einam ru'uyim lishmoa. She shouldn't be hearing the things that we tell her, and we tell her the whole story of Yehuda and Tamar, and we tell her about Reuven, and we tell her what things can be gerim such a thing, and of course the whole end of the Masechet with the idea of Egla Rufa, which is the Vayares HaAgalot, and that's Miramis, the whole Egla Rufa that was going on between Yosef and Yaakov, and the question of the Levaya, and what was the Livyat Chen, that the Gemara says it should be Malafim with Divrei Torah, which is here Merumas in the story in which they were Malav all the way to Tzanisa de Bavel. So the Gemara in Brochus takes that same Tzanisa de Bavel and the dinim of Levaya and translate it into the idea of that a person should never break with a friend and say goodbye unless it's bitoch divrei Torah. So what's bitoch divrei Torah? Bitoch divrei Torah, they get back to the Gemara inside to here, which is it true that these things were here from the time of Adam Arisha? And no, actually, I remember now what the union is. How is it shaykh to say, Ashel, Lo avar adam sham, it says lo yashav sham. Obviously, if lo avar, ech yashav, what's it shaykh? Elo malamdecha, that every place on earth that Adam Arishon was geyser, that should be mityashiv, that was mityashiv, and anything that he was, it wasn't mityashiv, which is the vision, the whole idea of levaya that accompanies the way that a dream and a vision accompany us throughout history. So that we have over here very, very many issues that are brought on it. Satan revolves around all of the stories of the Mida Keneged Mida that take place here in the way that he was Mevaser, Hakerna, and because of that, the story with Tamar was the Hakerna, exactly the same thing. We have the Musti Yuknei Shalavim that appears over here, the Lasot Melachto, the Vatesha Beitem Kashto, the stories of the children of Bnei Ben Yamin, which according to Zohar, he never had them, but they're like a virtual bonim because he had a vision of having those bonim, but he was Makadish himself not to have those bonim. That's the story here, in which Soda Hashem Lireav, the Gemara says, Benaz, I never got married. How's he telling you what the personal shir is of Stira? It says Soda Hashem Lireav is exactly the same inyan. And we have the entire story of Edut Yosef Somo, B'Tzetal Eretz Mitzrayim, Svat Lo Yadat Yeshma, which is the question of how they tried to keep Yosef down because he's a nar, Ivri, which Rashi brings, and which Paro says Genuni Malchus on Irayabo. They said to him, "No, if you so sure Genuni Malchus in Kenya Misaper B'Shivim Loshen." And comes along Gavriel and it teaches him the Shivim Loshen, and then he tries talking to Paro in Loshen HaKodesh, and Paro can't speak and he doesn't learn. He makes him swear that he won't tell anybody. It's because of that swearing that he ends up being able to take Yaakov up, and then we get into the whole story of the Levaya of Yaakov and who was able to take Atzmas Yosef, or what's the Mida Keneged Mida, of the crazy things that appear over here. And of course, it's the whole end of the Masechta. There's the difference between Elon Amar B'Cholosh and Elamar B'Lashon HaKodesh. There's the whole discussion between Paro and Yosef about which languages he's supposed to be able to speak. It's very, very strange interrelationships over here. The story of Shema Hashem called Yehuda, and the way that Yehuda's Hodah was mashpia on Reuven. And it seems that this is somehow central to our understanding of all of these events, and yet doesn't seem to have anything to do with it. I mean, what in the world should this Masechet Sotah should have to do with all of these parashot? And amazingly, it has everything to do with all those parashas. It's not because it's coincidental beyond that we bring in all of these inyonim. The Gemara opens up with a fundamental question in Sota, which we'll see is Lamaisa Nogia, our entire understanding of the strangeness of this Masechet, in which things that are normally bad look good, and things that look good are bad. It's very, very confusing. And the Masechet opens up with the question of, as the Torah Kadesha tells us in the Sugya of Seta, that's Vavar Lav Ruach Kina V'Kinei Tishto. The Gemara is questioning, what is a Ruach Kina? Is it a Ruach Tara, or is it a Ruach of Tuma? That's a machlokas in the Gemara, which may take the whole Sugya, its relationship to Nazir, and question whether the whole thing is a good thing or the whole thing is a bad thing. Nannikins, can I trouble you, sweetheart, to bring a cup of tea or just a little bit hoarse? Any kind, just mix it with water. I should be able to drink it. Thank you so much. Now, I mean, that's the question over here, Bechal, is exactly what Yosef is involved, is in that question. In other words, the entire issue of Chanuka and the entire issue of all of these parshas is to determine the interrelationship between Kina and Kanos, but in very, very great detail, such that the transition between the story of Yosef Echad and Vayekanu Bo Echav is a story that finds its very strange and rapid end in the transformation of what was initially Kina into an incredible Kanos, in which you find exactly the same reaction that you have with the Hashmonaim and the Greeks, in which the sense of compromise ends, and at that point, I don't put up with anything. I'm ready to take on the entire country, even if I'm a group of few people. That's exactly what happens over here. So between Miketz and Vayigash, the same people who were completely and totally broken just a few sentences ago, Manomar, Manitz Tadak, Elohim Matzat Avanavdecha, Kolano Avadim, and so on, all of a sudden becomes, as the Medrash points out, okay, boys, let's split up. You know, we'll each take 1/12 of the country and destroy it. Let him try to stop us. I'd like to see him try. No, I mean, it's just unbelievable. And that's the Kikamocha Kefaro, because that's it. Boom. So we have this very amazing, rapid, instantaneous transition, but its transition obviously is building on the keches of what was initially Kina, and then is transformed somehow through all of these things that Yosef is doing, is transformed into Kanos itself. And of course, that becomes fundamental to the story, because it's amazing that one of the things that Yosef does here is he's careful to force the family into the contemplation of that distinction by doing a very simple thing. He splits Shimon and Levi. And he takes Shimon and he puts him into the Mishmar, and he puts Levi into the Malon, which of course has all Levi in the Malon. You'll notice is the only one who finds anything. You know, nobody else finds anything in the packages. Levi finds something in his package. And we'll see how significant this is. It's an absolutely incredible story that the Gemara is only meramis to very briefly in Tainis. And in doing that, he creates what turns out to be a historical distinction. He does this after 3 days in the Mishmar, where they're all for 3 days. The Farshim point out, the Medrash points out that those 3 days are the 3 days of Shem. And they're supposed to be thinking that. He wants them to consider what would be the significance of bearing. Then all of a sudden finding Shimon and Levi separated out, exactly the question that becomes the difference between Shimon, who with his kanos ends up with Zimri, and Levi, with his kanos, ends up with Pinchas. And that's the whole story here in Saita, as the Gemara says. Why do we have a Mashuach Milchama? Who is Pinchas? Because Pinchas goes now to be Noikim, the Nekama of Yosef from the Midyanim who sold him. It's absolutely crazy. What in the world that has to do with the story of the Meshuach B'chama, which is so important over here, is one of those in Yonim. That is a din in Lashon HaKodesh. So there's a place over here that involved Yosef very much Gufa in this distinction. And this idea of the difference between Kina, whether it's a Kina that is, and it's a Ruach Kina. And we know that the essential inyan of Chanuka is the determination, as it says in the Navi, and Zechariah himself is confused by his own Nevi'as. And the Nevi'as is a strange Nevi'as of Miketz, because Miketz also means to wake up, and like Paro. And the story of the Nerais of Zechariah is a story of someone who is in the midst of a Nevi'as and sees himself woken up in that Nevi'as, which obviously reminds you of the entire beginning of the Sugya with Yaakov Avinu. So, Vayayireni ki ish asher yair mishnato. And he asks me, Ma ta ro'eh? And I describe to him the Neira that I see. And then the Malach says to me, and you understand what this means, of course? And I say, I don't have a clue. And it's this whole complicated vision. And the Malach says to him, Zedvar Hashem was Rubava Lemar, Lo Berchayel Velo Bekoach Ki Im Beruchi. That Beruchi, obviously, is the determination of Ruach Kina. Does that mean a Ruach Kina of Tuma? Does that mean a Ruach Kina of Tara? As the Arizal points out, the gematria of Yosef itself is Kina. And the determination of the nature of Kina is by Yosef Atzar. And all of the elements of Seita in terms of his relationship to women and the way in which Kina is a function, as the Zohar points out, of love, it is not only a function of love, it's an artifact of love. Because the more one loves something, the more one is mekane for it, not of it. And therefore, as the Zohar says, that's why Pinchas is zeichet to brisi shalom, because if it doesn't come from love, then it isn't kanod, and it's just kina. And yet, the fact that the two words are the same, obviously, as we've pointed out often in the past, means that there's some fundamental interrelationship between them. And this is what it is that Yosef is coming to be Mavar, and he carefully teases apart these distinctions throughout the entire story. And we have to ask ourselves, I mean, this Seita, it's all very nice to say we tell her things that she isn't yet to hear, but the question is, why do we tell it to her? But it's not only that we tell it to her, it's that there's something strange about the entire story of the Seita. Again, these are things that we've spoken about. We'll belabor them. We've seen them often in the Sugya of Seita itself, in Nosai, and in the discussion of Achitofel, and the opinion of Beis HaMikdash, and so on. But we know that there is a deep, one could say it appears in the Torah almost as an ambivalence in our response to the Sota. On the one hand, we say Atki Satit, as the Mepharshim point out, the Atki Satit means you are a Seita. There's nothing to do with whether you slept with this guy, you didn't sleep with this guy. Bottom line is that this behavior is intolerable, and therefore, this is the way that we are treating you. So we bring the Kfifa Mitzrit, and her acts are acts of a behemoth, and we use Dafka, the lowest class that is possible in a mincha, which is Sa'irin, that haven't been properly processed Sa'irin, and there's nothing mahudar about it. We don't put on anything nice, and the shaman and the levain, all normal things of the mincha, everything we don't have. And we look at her as if she's gone, like Richie almost. No, but she's not gone yet. Oh. Hey. Yeah, no. It wouldn't be a shear without a Richie. And then we'd have to wait.
Not much left.
You want to break your foot? No, you want to try and do it.
You wanted-
Oh, what did you want really?
Not me.
Oh, no, somebody suggested. Yeah. And we know that with all of this, the result is that the Saita, who is a Saita because at Kisati, so the Gemara says, V'nikta v'nizra zera, and that if she had difficult births, she'll have easy births, and if there was a problem in pregnancies, she'll have easy pregnancies. If her children were not beautiful children, now they will be beautiful children. And that's the remez and Avram Avinu offer Saita offer v'efer, that she'll have children that are similar to Avram Avinu. What in the world? Well, how does this happen? I mean, there too, we're talking about, is this an hoga of the way that she's acted? This is appropriate or it's inappropriate? What's going on? How is it that we reward inappropriate behavior by the increase in fertility, which we pointed out is exactly the case about the Mishkan itself and the Migdash itself. So in the creation of the Beis HaMikdash, we went through exactly the same events in which David HaMelech, when he was Korashisim, he needed to be Beidek, the world's relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, like your Beidek Saita, because he had pulled open the Tahom. And there was a whole story with Achitophel, that if you're able to be raised to shame for personal relationship, and Yishlish, the kosher came between the world and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, they raised to shame. And sure enough, the Tahom went back down, and then David realized, why shouldn't we use the opportunity to increase the fertility of the earth? And that's the test of Shir HaMalos, in which what originally had violated the sanctity of the chaspa that was al tahom, that says, don't touch me, you're not allowed to touch me. As a result of which, he increases the fertility of the earth, brings up the water table by 15,000 ames, getting at each one of the Shir HaMalos. It's also a weird story. As a result of which, we say, okay, in order to persuade the Saita that she shouldn't be afraid and she should admit, if she had, we talked to her about what Yehuda did. Okay, then we talked to her about what Reuven did. Then we might remember that in the middle of all of this, of course, comes the beginning of the Malchus Yisrael, which ends up, as the Rambam says, I mean, Hanukkah is like 200 years of that. Malchus Yisrael, of course, is the middle of this story. So before we even have the Yeridas of Mitzrayim at the end, as the Medrash puts it, before we start with the first Golas, we already have to make sure that the Mashiach HaAchron is Neilad. The Mashiach HaAchron is Neilad of all things, from exactly the things that the Satan is not supposed to hear. I mean, shouldn't deserve to hear, but we have to tell her. And that's the story of Yehuda v'Tamar. But Yehuda v'Tamar give birth to, of all things, parents, which is Britzos, which is this basically the entire story of Ruth and Boaz, and all of the issues that continue on from Yehuda and Tamar. And then, I mean, if you think that this is just a coincidence, remember that Yaakov Avinu was convinced that it must be that Shimshon HaGibor must be Mashiach. I mean, Shimshon HaGibor was no lily white non-Saita either, you know. There's something awfully funny about the getter of the Pritzah specifically in the issue of Saita. I mean, it's not as if the brothers didn't have certain things that were true about Yosef, especially as the one says over here, he was Nichlas Lasos Malachto. Lucky boy that he had to move to Yukta Shalaviv in the window. Not everybody's got that in the window. I mean, you know, so in this the whole Gemara that he loses, he should have had 12 shvatim, he loses 10 shvatim, because Vayafuz Yadav, this is Vatesha Beitan Kashto, also all very similar to the stories that we have Lagabe Boaz. But the only two places where we discuss erections in the entire Torah is Vatesha Beitan Kashto and the story of Boaz. Nasir B'Sork Rosh Lefoses. Very, very odd. And it's got to be that there's some interrelationship over here with the fundamental nature of the confusion of the good, bad questions that need to come to an understanding throughout the parshios that we have over here. And that's why it's not coincidental, of course, that the very things that the brothers accuse Yosef of is indeed what he turns into. So Enochinami, he turns into whatever they thought he was going to turn into, and he becomes the international symbol of the Playboy in Mitzrayim. The girls are climbing up the walls, and everything that they said was true. Except that somehow or other, all of this is the hakana for the growth of Klal Yisrael, to becoming Klal Yisrael, and is done entirely within the nature of Kedusha until it becomes Yosef HaTzadik, Mashpilach Haaretz, which the entire earth is able to be misparnes from it, and so on and so forth. And it all turns out to be just, at least according to Rashi, and those who learn like Rashi, just until Yaakov gets back down to Mitzrayim, then I'll take over, thank you. And now the Milus comes up anyway, so we don't really need all of these wonderful jokes, which is only meant to establish the relationship of Yosef and Yaakov anyway. And that entire relationship, mind you, is based, even though this doesn't come out clearly, if you don't understand the Kabbalistic Ramazim in the story of Ela told us Yaakov Yosef. But it comes out in the idea of the Ksenes Pasim. Now, the Chazal tells the Ksenes Pasim is Al Shem Pasim, stands for the Potifar, which is strange, that's the end of the story. Okay, so it's Pasim, Potifar, and then the Socharim that passed by, and the Yishmaelim, and the Midyanim. Now, the Midyanim, they were the first ones, sort of backwards, and the Midyanim are the ones that actually Pinchas went out to be naked, and the Niklas Yosef for the Midyanim, not from Potifar. But anyway, for some reason it's possible. The obvious problem is that by the time those events happened, the Ksenes Pasim wasn't there. They had ripped it off of him, dipped it in blood, and brought it back to Yaakov. It was a crazy thing to call the Ksenes Pasim. Dafka al Shem, the things that didn't happen to it. Right? I mean, unless the Ksenes Pasim itself is really related to the cell of Yosef as was given. In other words, Yaakov Avinu was giving Ksenes Pasim, already contained within it those cells. Now, if you analyze the meaning of Ksenes Pasim, according to most of the Rishonim, it basically means designer clothing. Right? In other words, however one understands it, in terms of the quality of the cloth, the design, the colors, many, many different pshatim. But the idea over here is, it's the way we make fun of designers' clothes. What's the difference? Designers' clothes, it's got $2 extra worth of, designer labels on it. And that's what the Gemara says, Shnei Slayim Milas, that's all it is, Shnei Slayim Milas on it. Yeah, but okay, come on, it depends. Did they write Banana Republic on the outside or on the inside? If it's on the outside, then it costs you $300 for the sweater. If it's on the inside, then it's only $100 for the sweater. Okay, so over here, this is the Shnei Slayim Milas. Now, designer clothing, I think, what the heck is he sending him? He's putting his, we read the beginning of the parsha. We think, okay, the beginning of the parsha, so okay, he's a kid, he's 17 years old. So he puts on a little eyeshadow, a little weird, Yaakov in his house, that he's, sitting and playing with his eyes, it's awfully modern. But you wonder what's with this kid, right? Has he got problems of sexual identity? What is he doing? But he comes along, Yaakov Avinu, and supplies him with designer clothing. All right, so now, it doesn't look like he's doing much in the way of chinuch for this type of behavior, right? And here's Yosef, who's taking upon himself to make certain that Yaakov remains deeply involved with the chinuch of his other brothers. So this whole Gemara about Zigud, that he's going around and he's telling the Rebbe what his chavrus is doing, and then they beat him up instead. This is what kind of business you hold. If you're going to tell your Rebbe what your chavrus is doing, you have to know that he believes you 100%. But Yaakov did believe it. So in other words, his telling Yaakov was a desire to get Yaakov involved in what he felt were undoubtedly subtle, but chesronos that he noted in the brothers. And Yaakov Avinu was bikish leisha b'shalva, so wasn't taking the responsibility that he, Yosef, felt he was supposed to take. Fine. So this is the one that Yaakov is not being mechanech, or at least it looks like he's not being mechanech. But the worst part is that by giving him a Ksenes Pasim, he turns him into a sex toy. And we know that, as Rashi tells us, the sale to Potifar was for exactly that purpose. Obviously, we're not going to sell him as a diamond cutter. What exactly is he going to be doing, this pretty boy? So that means that all of the cells that were taking place are defined by pay of the Potiphar, of the Pekaris Basin, which was Nigram Ayada Yaakov Avinu, which becomes part of the story of where the brothers went in order to find Yosef, right? So yeah, that's why Yosef drags them in and says, well, what is the whole family doing the red light district of every town in Mitzrayim? Would you explain that? This is supposed to be normal? And so, okay, so they're trying to tell him we had a brother, it was sold, and this, we figured we'd find him in the red light district. I mean, all right, okay. This comes up again, ma paro, also. At the end, this is like part of the Vayesh Lav. But that means that we find the Ela told us Yaakov, Yosef, even Al Pipshat, very deeply involved in the way that the Zohar understands the Ela told us Yaakov, Yosef is that the entire expression, which was Choser in Yaakov, as we explained in last week's show. All this is built on last week's show. I'm not going to go over again with you the Inyanim, but you'll recall what starts this going is the breakdown in Vayivater Yaakov Levado, which was connected with Niskav Hashem Levado, and is the reference to what happens with the breakdown in the Giranasha. Yosef HaTzadik in the end works to be mitaken that Giranasha, and that tikkun itself is Nashani Elohim, at Kol Beit Avi, which becomes his child Menashe himself. There's a lot of similarities to Yosef's behavior. And that idea is the fact that there is a breakdown in translation. Something is lost in translation. Yaakov Avinu has dreams. Yaakov Avinu has a vision, which becomes Tiferes. The getter of Tiferes is that it needs to be able to be mischaber to the world, and that's the sulam that's supposed to be standing on the ground. And in standing on the ground, he is broken. So he loses the keach of his raglayim, which are the tomchim. It's the Gemara Darshan, it's the psochim, that becomes the loss of his ability to translate things into the bottom line. The bottom line is money, which is why it is that Yehuda in the end has ma betzak. If there's no money to be made in it, if there's no money to be made in it, then it's the wrong on Argo, which is an amazing, people think it's a joke. But that's a direct description of what happens with the breakdown of, as the Zohar says, the breakdown of Tomchei Oraita and all other elements that allow a person to be able to succeed in purely Olam Hazeh terms. And this is a long story that we've spoken about many, many shiurim from different angles. This is the original breakdown that leads to the requirements of that tikkun to rebuild it. First stage in rebuilding such a thing is, as Chazal explained to us, that's the inyan of Ben Zikunim. The brothers understood Ben Zikunim to be a psychological problem in Yaakov Avinu. They saw it as a translation of an overly romantic relationship that he had with Rachel. And because of that, he became overly attached to this child, which you'll understand it's not possible that the brothers would have done something like this to Yaakov if they had had inkling even at the impact that it was going to have on Yaakov Avinu's life. It was not shaykh, they would have put their father through this. In believing that it was his own fixation, and obviously they held it was the simplest thing to get over. People get over fixations when you take away the fixation. So fine, so the old man will get over it. No good, he'll learn his lesson. He'll come back to reality and we'll start. In the end, what they need to recognize is that not only did he not get over it, but that the most important thing in their life is to protect that relationship, even in its secondary form of Binyamin, which is why Yosef creates a Binyamin who is supposed to remind them of Rachel in every way, with the story of the Trafim and stealing the coast and crazy things. They're all shouting at him, Gnavta, Gnava, Bar Gnavta, just like your mother, disgusting person, but we're all ready to die for you. We'll take on the whole country if necessary. Because the reality is that the distance of Tiferes through Yesod, and Yesod is, of course, exactly the things that relate to the flow that we identify with sexual energy and with the Chen of Yosef later on, and which Mitzrayim and Paro go out of their way to encourage. Paro attempts to actually do the same thing Yaakov does for exactly the same reason. So the relationship between Tiferes, Yesod, and Malchus is absolutely essential for the creation in the end of an Am Yisrael, for the Malchus of Yisrael. And everything that they looked at as being overly intense and being personalized was, as Chazal bring out, the expression of Yaakov Avinu himself within Yosef. And therefore we have all the midrashim of the dozens of things of Kol Masha Karla Yaakov Karla Yosef. And it was exactly the same thing in Barzik Ben Zekunim, is Bar Hakima, and everything that Yaakov Avinu learned from Shem Ve'aver and all of those years he gave over to Yosef. You ask yourself, so what is that for? Why didn't he give it over to the others? That's exactly what they're saying. That's the Vaya Chanuka, because of the Ben Zekunim aspect. So you see clearly over here that that nature of Ben Zekunim is totally, remarkably, a mirror image of what is Ben Zekunim in terms of Goyim. It's an absolutely, positively impersonal relationship. It's a relationship of profound intimacy with zero persona involved. Or at least that's the way it's supposed to be. And any element, it's because of that, of course, that the Torah is made. It's not Yaakov who loves Yosef. It's Yisrael who loves Yosef. The rest of the story is about Yaakov. It's Yisrael who loves Yosef. It's Yisrael, where we had an amazing kind of conversation, where Yisrael says to Yosef, Inena achecha ro'im b'Shechem. So, l'cha v'shlachach aleim. Yosef Hineni, right? Okay, that's the shlichut, right? No. So the next pasuk says, okay, so go down to Shem and see how they're doing. Okay? That's what you just said, no? I said Hineni, I'm on my way. No. That first pasuk was a communication with Yosef that we are about to do something astounding. Is this not the case? Hello, achecha there? This is what I want to do. I want to send you there, which is a disaster, right? But I want to send you there. But only if you think you can handle it. I'm ready. Hineni. Okay, says Yisrael. Then here we go. Yosef, I want you to go down to Shem. It's unbelievable. The formality of it, the clarity of the planning that's involved, the need for the Kabbalah of, and that's the lecha. Lecha always means prepare yourself, as the Rishonim say. You ready? I'm ready. So this is a vision of a Yisrael that believes that it's possible to restore Shlom Achecha. And indeed, that was meant to be B'Shechem. Was totally messed up by the entire Dotan issue, as we've spoken about. I'll be Baramis to it again here. And it means that the loss of that vision of Yisrael, which only comes back alive again in the course of this parsha, when he suddenly wakes up as Yisrael and says to the brothers, okay, if that's the case, I'm giving you your orders. This is what you're going to do. He tells them this insanity about bringing down the peanuts and the popcorns and the Cracker Jacks down to Yosef, who's about to murder them all, you understand? So he's the only one that has any sense of what's going on. And it turns out that that's exactly what they needed to do. And that becomes the Hachein, which of course is Merames to the Vehechinu. That becomes Yosef's statement to his, turns out to be Menashe. Tvorach tefach v'hachein. What is that v'hachein, says the Gemara? Take out the Gid Anashe right in front of him. Because this is the first Alkein lo yochlu. And as the Gemara says, this is the Vashalach b'Yakov, the pasuk says, v'nafal b'Yisrael. It's the first stage in which Yaakov Avinu as an individual needs so much to be connected to Yisrael that any failure defines the nature of Klal Yisrael forever. Alkein lo yochlu b'nei Yisrael. It's an amazing pasuk again, which people, Alkein lo yochlu. What does that mean? Why? What's the big deal? Everything that happened, when anything that happened becomes automatically part of the story of the nature of Yisrael? Obviously not. So the idea over here is that the Torah is telling you right up front in the context of getting the name of Yisrael to Yaakov. And the Lo Yaakov Yeshbachim, Yisrael Yeshemech, and the fight B'cha v'Yischanan lo with the Malach, which is Merames, as we've said, to Chanuka, that's the B'cha, B'cha Fei, v'Yischanan is Chanuka. Lo is the Lamed Vav Neres of Chanuka. These are all the Midrashim point out these nekudas of the way from the beginning. There was the Pachim Ketanim, which becomes the Pach Hashem. This all starts with there and has to go through what in Goyim's mind is filthy and nasty and dvorim that she shouldn't be listening, and questions in the Gemara about, is it right to even read these parshas barabim, and don't we have to be chayshish for the covet of the people that are involved? And who knows how many people allow their kids to hear these parshas? Are supposed to learn about masturbation when they're 6 years old. I mean, what are you supposed to tell them the story of the parsha? It's the crazy stuff in the parsha of the Torah. All of this turns out to be part of the tikkun of how somehow or other the elements of the Seder that were mikalkel become part of something entirely different, which is the building of Malchus itself in terms of how it's connected to the essence of Yaakov Avinu, beauty, Tiferes, and the shlemus of Ma'aser Bereishis itself, which is absolutely an astounding idea. And you'll note how the impact of Yehuda on these is, but it's Mom's crazy story about Nadiv. Shimsh is not here, but Nadiv pointed out the relationship, but the impact of the relationship. It's because of this breakdown in the understanding of the meaning of the Ketonet Pasuk that we have a crazy story that almost destroys Malchus based on it. So you have this Tamar, who's wearing a Ketonet Pasim, the second, who is now raped by Amnon, and because of that, Avshalom goes out and murders him. Amnon rapes her by saying, my gosh, Hotziu kol ish me'elai. Does that sound familiar? And then she becomes the takona of Eishes Yafas Toar. And she was really shera for him, because after all, they weren't really related, because she was the daughter of a Yafas Toar, and she was not really from a Jewish mother, and all crazy stories. She comes out to be B'takein Sniut B'Yisrael as Tamar, and therefore tears up her Ketonet Pasim. That Ketonet Pasim now serves the exact opposite meaning, because of which Avshalom attempts to destroy David HaMelech and almost succeeds. This becomes like the mirror image of the Ma'aser that take place over here, with many words that are lifted as if the pasuk is attempting to force you to note the emotions that are involved, and the mirror image of the kelim that are involved, and the stories that are involved. Really weird. So it's to that extent that we have this interrelationship of our history with the events, to the point where there's even the case over here of the Chacham Lahara, because he refuses to acknowledge Ish Navon, the Chacham of Yosef, is the one that is going the entire thing to happen. You look through the story of Shmuel, you'll see the most amazing interrelationships there. So the question of Ki'im Beruchi and what that means, identifying what that Ki'im Beruchi actually is, becomes the nature of the Kiyum of the Chalomot, which are Beruchi, as Paro himself says. The Ruach Elokim is in you. Nebuchadnezzar says exactly the same thing. The Asher Ruach Elohah Kadisha is in Daniel, and that's why I'm listening to him. And that's the end of what here appears to be a crazy story of Deus Ex Machina that keep appearing again and again with these weird voices off screen, in which everybody feels that they are somehow players on a chessboard and they're not making their own moves. So whatever happens, so first you have the Yehuda and Tamar story, where first Amalek appears off screen, as the Medrash says, right? So the Amalek says to Yehuda, excuse me, you can't turn away from her. She's pretty. Hey, look, Mehechan Melachim Yavo, Mehechan Avim Yavo. Turn around and do your job. And then after he's made it Tzadka, then that word Mimeni is a voice from above. Mimeni, you know what I'm saying? You have to have like a loudspeaker off stage to be able to make it really sound proper the way it's supposed to be. Or, that's the loudspeakers, Rashi says. Not them saying that, because that wouldn't make any sense. And then when not Yaakov, but Yisrael sends Yosef down to them, for obviously he holds that it's still possible to interact with them. So then it becomes Me'emek Chevron. It's Mukash, Tzadika, Kavur, Bechavron, Geri, Yazaracha, Beretz Lolahem, as if things are part of dreams that are outside of our knowledge. And this is now a it's brought out beautifully by the Medrash, who points out that nobody knows what they're doing. So here Reuven is doing this, and Yosef is doing this, and Yaakov is doing this. They all have this vision of what's taking place, and the only one who knows what he's doing, and he's busy too, as the Medrash puts it. I'm also busy, says HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I'm busy creating Orosh Mashiach. You guys are busy being miserable or doing whatever you think is important, which has no meaning at all. So that this end of that, the identification, what Ki'im Baruchi is, that is actually the end of a story and the end of voices from the off stage, which is the result of a breakdown in Giranash, is that indeed you no longer function as a real player. You are somebody else's piece. And being somebody else's piece brings you no peace and makes you feel completely detached from everything that's going on as the source of much of modern day alienation, a feeling that everybody goes through. And it's like I'm watching things happen. I don't have any connection to them, as I don't even understand what I'm doing here. It's my presence seems to be completely irrelevant, and these events are taking place almost as if they're taking place despite me, instead of my making my life in any way. That's an awful feeling. And that's a feeling that is deeply connected by your simcha to the lack of simcha and the type of darkness, which is Chanuka itself. And so we have over here not Stam, Orosh, or Mashiach, the Mashiach Achman, as we said. We have all of the inyanim over here that are maramis to the other goliness, whether it's in terms of Daniel or it's in terms of Chamesh Chalifot Smalot, of Haman and Mordechai, and the all other remozim of Adulam, and the coming of the Beis Hamikdash is built from Adulam, and in the end, the very beginning becomes the Eglah Rufa, as we saw, and the need for taking responsibility of the Tbodedut to the nearest city. That was the start of where was it Yaakov, and it was Yotze, where it was Yotza Ora and Yotza exactly Hadara. The inyanim of Chanukah Mamsha goes away, which is the impact of a city on the Mokum and how the individual in that city makes that difference. And that's the Pona Ora, which becomes the Migrash Alavim, which those of you who learned the end of the Masechta. The Pes Yudaf and becomes Bottle over here. And this is Yosef and Pinchas, and the difference between the Mishmar and the Malon, which is the Beis Hamikdash, which brings us all the way back here to the Inyanim of Saita. Now, in terms of the fundamentals of what's happening here, the Gemara does not hide the fact that Saita is itself here as part of the entire development of the nature of relationships from the time of Gan Eden, that all of the things that take place in the Saita are references to the Yesodis of Midas Din and go back to the numbers. So wherever someone is Mavakish Masha'eno Shalom, Masha Shalom not Limimeno, what is Mavakish doesn't get. And that's exactly what happens with the Nochash. And this becomes the nature of Chet. Ein Adam Chotei Limkin Nichlas Bo Ruach Shtut is the relationship of Sota to Shota, which is spelled here with a shin instead of with a samach to teach us this. The Moalo Bomal is a reference to Isha Shalamala, which is Hashem Ish Milchama, and the Isyas of the Yud and the Hey that are Bedubak and Ish Isha, in that the aim is of Adam as we begin, whether it's Arboin Yam Karim Yitziras Havlad, or whether it's in terms of aim is Davgin Ladam, Elulafi Ma'asav. This touches on the underlying problem in which the Asher Shamata L'Kol Ishtecha, which is the essence of the Achil of the Yetzadas, which of course is the reason that all of these issues are the issues of language, which is the original approach to the Yetzadas. You remember, first thing, you recall the story of Gan Eden. You may have read it once or twice in the holy books, but unfortunately people read right through it as if it doesn't mean anything. Before the Adam is there, the Adam is Levada. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, poor Adam, Lo Tov Adam Levada. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to make him a partner. And so you expect the next pasuk is that God's bringing the partner. No, the next pasuk is God speaks to Adam and says, could you tell me the names of all of these things, please? This becomes the inception of language and the differences in language and Kol Masha Karao Adam hu shemo, language as a mechanism is the wrong word because it's not a mechanism at that point until the Akila of the Eitz Hadas. Language becomes a modality of connection, of understanding, and of da'at. And da'at, of course, in the end becomes sexual da'at, which is why, according to the Gemara, and as Rashi explains, the simple meaning of the pasuk, in order to name the animals, Adam has to sleep with the animals. Because you can't name and love something unless you are connected to them. Again, our feelings about these things are irrelevant. In the period before, there was the nature of Ra and Tov, and therefore it's just silliness that we respond to this with smirks and giggles and so on. But this is the essence of language, the essence of love, the essence of connection, and that's the reason why all of the dinim of Lashon, in which things, whether it's Kriyat Shema, Birkas Kohanim, Mishra, Melchama, whether it's the brises of the Torah themselves, and our Grizim and our Eva, all of those discussions of the language that are so central to it are discussed specifically in Saita, with the breakdowns that were innate in Aisha Shenatata Imadi Natnali V'achal. And that V'achal becomes now the entire problem that is based, as Chazal say, on the breakdown in Hakaras Teva for HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Maisim, which become, in the end, here in Chanukah, the absolute opposite, which is for the first time we are Kurveya Hodoya. And this Hodaya is the meaning of not only the acceptance of the reality of the way the world is, which is the nature of Hakaras Teva, and therefore becomes a tikkun for, as the Gemara here in Seita tells us, it used to be before the Chet of the Egel, but the Shekhinah was meant to be, and that's the Kiyim B'Ruchi, was meant to be with each and every person. That's it's only because of Chet that broke down. That continues to break down if there's any element of that Chet in Machaneh. And that same issue is what destroyed our Sinai, because you were Kuyei Teva, B'nei Kuyei Teva, B'nei Adam Rishon was Kafui Teva. Where was he Kafui Teva? Says the Gemara Avodah. This is the story of Aisha Shenatata Imadi, which means that the Yerushas Haaretz ends only because of the Tikkun of Bereshis, which is Kayach Maisav Higid Liamo, which turns into Kitavo Higati Ayob Hashem Elokecha, and becomes the entire story of the Haggadah Shel Pesach, which is Higadati, and that's the Higadati Levincha Bayamahu, and that's the Arami Obed Ovid of a year at Mitzrayim, and all of the parshas that are here are there to attain that moment of Halal V'Hodai. So the first stage of Yerushas Haaretz in its entirety, and in a real sense of Malchus, is dependent specifically in Chanukah. And therefore, it's obviously, we're talking over here about issues of incredible subtlety, and it's not surprising at all, but in terms of the development of the psyche, which is entirely what the Gid HaNasha is going to have to deal with, as we pointed out last week, the Parsha is raw. Last week's Parsha is raw. We mean raw in terms of the emotions that are there, the very raw emotions. They seem to be the type of emotions that you would find in Harlem, and you don't expect to find in the Avos and in the Shvatim of Shiftei Ka. But that's the whole point, is that a Gid HaNasha needs to be built on rawness, and because raw has that other element of preachers that's involved in it. Adayom, we used to say Lashon, and that is because if you are dealing with a connection between the Kiyim B'Ruchi and your feet on the ground, then you are making a terrible, terrible mistake if you believe that it's possible to build that tikkun without dealing with the incredible subtleties of the human psyche and understanding the delicacy of the differences, which take exactly the same drives and make of them something that can be part of a sulam that is Rosh Hagia Hashamayna and is Mutzav Arza, or Chas v'Shalom, the exact opposite, which drags every human and Adam, I say Adam beyond Stam human, Adam element, down into the earth. And that's the Shem Hashem that is Yotze over here in two ways. First of all, the fact that this Saita, despite her obvious love for this guy and her care for this guy and her involvement with this guy, as the Gemara remarkably says, I mean, so what did he do after all? This is what Abayas points out. So what's the big deal? What could have happened that we're talking about if it weren't that she actually slept with him? So what happened? So he felt her up a bit, says Abaya. This is going to be a problem. She said, what? It's Princess Bialma. What's the big deal? What's the big deal? Understand? She's an ancient siege. What's the big deal? So what the Torah says, Princess Bialma. Princess, that's exactly what we're talking about over here. So the fact that this is the Lashon that he uses. They get English Lashon, feeling her up. You think B'mashmesh ben Dadeh is nicer. It's a lot worse. You say in English. So if over here, that's no joke. We think English words. Okay, the Gemara is much more raw in this describing what's going on, right? So this idea of this Sota's commitment not to actually violate the bris that she has with her husband, and that is entirely in terms of the chibur of das, not erotica. We're saying that erotica, what is that? That's Princess Bialmi. One uses nation for erotica. What's the difference? I mean, Portnoy's complaint, this is the difference. And what's an afkamina? It's an amazing, amazing sense that the Gemara has of the difference of bris and real connection to what, in America it's all the same thing. What's the difference, If Clinton lights his cigars, that's already he's having relationships with this woman. And he's right. I never had relationships with this woman. True. In the sense that the Torah is makbid on relationships. This is what is it? It's an afkamina, one level of sensuality, another. What? So you're allowed to take her hand and you shake her hand a little bit too long. I think that makes it an afkamina. The Torah is an afkamina between shaking your hand a little bit too longer and feeling her up. There's no nafkamina, no. Not only that, there's no nafkamina between doing a mice of the children of Eli HaKohen and waiting too long to bring a carbon. There's no nafkamina between that and between pure sexuality. You told me that's entirely Freudian. It's birth. Exactly. So what's the difference? You're right. It's entirely Freudian. I get a kick out of letting this woman sit around waiting for me to bring her carbon. You're responsible for exactly what you're responsible for. That is the point. So in terms of her commitment to that difference, you see, and in terms of her commitment of going through, and this Gemara talks about the terror of drinking these mayim al and so on, of her drinking in order to be able to reestablish a relationship, and a Ruach Kinah that wants to reestablish that relationship. This is entirely opposite, you understand, of modern ideas. What difference does it make this a goy whether his wife has been going around and with a guy that the movies was feeling her up, or she's sleeping with somebody? The whole thing makes no difference to me. She's considered to be a bogeda. But that's because the nature of commitment and depth of a relationship and how irrelevant the sexual element of it is, other than as das and bris, is so fundamental to Klal Yisrael. The ability to maintain that distinction and to go through this process, despite the emotions, is exactly what the Parsha is all about. You need to separate between the emotions, the desires, and the fundamental Freudian steps in psychology, or whatever explanation you want to give them, and their integration and the modality of that integration into the human being as a whole. It is obvious, and this is the Yetzer Tinok Isha, the small doch of the Yamin Mekarev, which is part of the Gemara here in Saita, is the understanding that you have to be really nice to your Yetzer Hara. As Rashi says, what do you want to do? You want to be turned off? Is that what you want to do? You need to be Mekarev your Yetzer Hara. So this idea of small docha, Yamin Mekarev, is fundamentally part of your relationship to things, but you need to learn the difference between something personal, as we've explained, and something intimate. These are completely different issues. You go talking in English and nobody knows the difference. Well, that's personal. That's not personal. It's the least personal thing in the world. It's totally generic. As a matter of fact, the more personal you make it, the less personal it is. It's completely and totally generic. So the same way you'll go to your gynecologist, you'll go to your psychiatrist, exactly is the reason, because generic. I heard this story 1,000,000 times. I've seen these body parts 1,000,000 times. That's why I'm a doctor. That's why I'm a psychiatrist, or that's why I'm a human being. What possible interest does that have on a personal level? Zero. So anybody who does think that such a thing is personal becomes a porno addict, becomes the lowest of the low, a complete bittul of the entire nature of human sensitivity, of love, of care, of relationship. It's an amazing thing. Why? Because it's personal. And in direct, but literally, direct relationship, it's mamish an inverse proportion in which something like this is personal, it's not intimate. So there's no intimacy at all. It's only about me, whereas intimacy by definition is about the other, my relationship to the other. So the more personal, the less intimate. Amazing. That means that the interrelationship over here, in the understanding and the appreciation of what the relationship of Yaakov to Yosef meant, the difference between why it's possible for there to be a Yosef who can be Yaakov, and it doesn't matter if he's 17 years old, because there's something about the nature of the intimacy in which everything that happens to Yaakov happens to him, and to the point where Rashi brings as well, he looks like him, responds like him. This is the zivukin, it is ben zikunin, ben of zivikunin. So that we look the same, we feel the same to each other. We interrelate on different levels so that you, Yosef, become me in my ability to relate to the world as a youth, and I, Yaakov, am you in terms of your dreams and your sense of what this world is meant to be to you, which becomes, of course, Dmut Yukno Shel Aviv. That's the reason he has Dmut Yukno Shel Aviv. It's because it's always internal to him, Dmut Yukno Shel Aviv. Obviously, that's the raya that he is, in fact, Elatoldos Yaakov Yosef. So these stories are very, very deeply connected, as is the actual construction of the Beis Hamikdash itself, which is the reason that we have these relationships become the relationship to the Beis Hamikdash, because obviously, to whatever extent it's Nogea, Yisrael's, which is the relationship of Yisrael to Yaakov, Yisrael's Giran Nosha, it relates to HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence in the Olam. Because, in a sense, we all are that Yosef to HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Yisrael's dream. And to whatever extent we are capable of translating what it was that those dreams were, is the extent at which there's a presence of the Shekhinah in the Olam. And therefore, it's because of that, the entire story of Hanukkah is a remarkable description of how, for the first time, the events that take place here, the issues that take place here, which is Seita, Birkas Koyanim, and the idea of Hadlaka, these are all the parsha that we've been reading, because this is all Noso oriented. The reason that it's Noso oriented, and Nazir, of course, which is the Gemara's interrelationship of Nazirus and Seita, and it takes us to Shimshon, and the Nazirus of Shimshon, the birth of Shmuel, and so on. The reason is because this is the first time that the translation of the Chatzeres of the Mishkan become the definition of what Israel is. So that up until Nosei, there was no recognition that the Mishkan project, which was so incredibly invasive throughout that entire year, that Mishkan project was Nogea, everybody's personal home. This, of course, is the equivalent in Melachim of the building of the Beis Hamikdash and Shlomo HaMelech's Bayit. It's the interrelationship between them. Nosei describes the presence of the Mishkan in the life of every member of Machane Yisrael, which, of course, at that point was everyone. So therefore, the Koyanim are Mavarich all over. Now the question is, what is the nafkamina in the translation of Birchas Kohanim, utilizing the Shem and the Kim Ruchi with the Koma Koma Shavoilach of Berakticha in the Gvule, which is outside of the Beis HaMikdash proper? What is the relationship to Seita, which requires the actual offer bin Mishka, in order to be able to assert that bris in every individual's life, which is why it began with the David HaMelech's Bedika of Seita, and why the relationship to the Egel is only Mechuper, because Moshe Rabbeinu was Botkam Keseites to see what is the depth of Klal Yisrael's commitment to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and how much of this was real. So it's the Bedika of reality. What is your bottom line? And that bottom line is the Gidan Arsha. What is the bottom line of your understanding of your place in the world? This becomes an extension into Machane. And it's because of that that this is a holiday that remarkably, if you think about the amazing Kriyas HaTorah that we had today, it's such a beautiful Kriyas HaTorah, which it's the first time, if not the only time, that we take, first of all, as the most powerful reality that the connection of the individual to what he is doing makes it so unique that it cannot be included in anybody else's doing of exactly the same thing. That this is something that is so special in terms of understanding the nature of uniqueness of Hod, which is the essence of Hanukkah, that the Torah, which normally will not waste a single word, appears to anybody who's listening to it to be wasting words galore. Instead of saying, Vayavi kol nasi b'Yisrael, instead, it tells us everybody's name again. And oh my God, how many times are going to do this? And then at the end of that, you're going to go over, and that means, just in case you don't know how to add, and that means this is the total of X, and this is the total of Y, and this is the total of Z. And man, and all of this ends with the Kol HaMidaber. That Kol HaMidaber is the first time that the Shekhinah appears in its place, speaking to itself. Why to itself? Because my presence is so powerful here that it's not trying just to talk to you or to you or to you. Then there would be limits. I don't want there to be limits, as the Mefarshim explained. This is the ultimate unlimited Gili of the Shekhinah. You take what you can, anything that you can out of my speaking to myself. Because if it's anything less than to myself, then there's going to be something that maybe won't be yours one day. Amazing Zefurna. Completely with any sense of selfishness, of trying to control anything. It's all here for you. Try to get what you can out of it. Amazing, beautiful parsha, which ends in Ba'alot Chat HaNeirot, which becomes Shalchot Gadol Mishalahem. What's the Shalchot Gadol Mishalahem? Shata Madliket HaNeirot. Says the Ramban, well, obviously that can't be Madliket HaNeirot. I mean, everybody's bringing these korbanos, you're not Madlik. And there's even a medrash that says the korbanos of the other Nesian, it's all going to be Bato, but the Menorah won't be Bato, but the Shai won't be Bato. Must be referred to Menorah Chanukah. Is referred to Menorah Chanukah, what does it have to do with Aaron? Everybody likes the Menorah Chanukah. But that's the whole point. That the Yesod of Yisrael's relationship to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the Gevulim, throughout, what it means to do Aveda is totally redefined by Hanukkah. Such that the Ba'alot Chat HaNeirot, which is done by the Kohanim, becomes a mitzvah that is chaviva, part of this incredible tikkun that is the nature of the kahuna itself. And this is the amazing diak in the Rambam. And the Rambam described, we saw before that the Ramban learns that there was a chisor in the fact that the Kohanim took, so to speak, the Malchus away from Yehuda, and because of that, the end of Seita describes the breakdown in Orkanos and Aristobulus. But the Rambam learns. His Lashon is so beautiful. By Cheni Kishemochu Yavan, Gozu Gzerot Yisrael, Bitlu Datam, not that, it's water. Thanks. It's good.
Maybe that's a counter.
It's good. Thank you.
That's a counter malchus. Stressing the malchus of Yavon, and then we come back to our malchus.
Yeah. ולא הניחו אותם לעסוק בתורה ובמצוות, פשטו ידם בממון ובבנותיהם, פורצו בו פרצות, טימאו הטהרות, צר להם מישראל מאוד. לחץ גדול, עד שריחם עליהם אלוקי אבותינו, והושיעם מידם והצילם. Right? That seems to be the end of the story. Continues the Rambam. וגברו בני חשמונאי הכהנים הגדולים, והרגום, והושיעו ישראל מידם. You just said that Hashem was Moshiach a minute ago. What are you talking now? I mean, if you want to say that, that's the ways, then just say that. עד שריחם עליהם הקדוש ברוך הוא, ועזר לבני חשמונאי, instead it's as if it's to say, הושיעם מידם, וגברו בני חשמונאי הכהנים, והרגום והושיעו ישראל מידם, והעמידו מלך מן הכהנים. Now, what is that important? Notice the Rambam is stressing that there is a new level of malchus here, that is min hakohanim, and that the Yeshua of HaKadosh Baruch Hu enabled the hiskabus of the kohanim. And this becomes now part of the entire story of Hanukkah, where we talk about Dafka Tmeim, and B'yatahirim, and the interrelationship of Tuma, the Tahira, and the inyanim of the Chatzrei Shecha. And why is that the Inyan? Because that's the Inyan of Nasei B'chlal. That's the Inyan of Satan. That's the Inyan of Birkas Kayanim. And it becomes a complete and total revision of what the nature of the elements of Bahalotecha and what it is that changed in Hanukkah to redefine the way that Yisrael is Mavdil, because it's the end of a Golus, and that requires a new level of Havdalah ben Yisrael Ha'amim, and of what it is that was achieved in Hanukkah, and how it is that a Beis HaMikdash is now redefined in terms of its Aveda, which becomes central in this new story. And gentlemen, in all honesty, if you think about it, it's obvious that the Beis HaMikdash's relationship in our eyes to Karbonos is tremendously limited. There is no longer the Zika of Bnei Adam to the animal in order to be able to achieve the sensibility and sensitivity to the nature of evolution and to the connection of the complexity that life demands and that continued development comes from, correct? Instead, the relationship that we have to the meaning of Aveda is, in fact, the understanding of the nature of reality that remarkably is strongly Yavan-oriented. It's built of mathematics. It's built of the search for an underlying structure to reality, which expresses itself in light, exactly as it did for the Greeks, and exactly as it turns out for the strangest reasons that all of our fundamental equations also must utilize as exactly in every single equation that defines our place in the universe. It is always Nogea C. And that becomes absolutely a given to us to the extent that it defines the nature of our reality in the deepest ways. The nature of the way the or is literally linked to every possible structure that we experience, which we think are discrete elements and things. Amazingly, as the Zohar says 1,000 years ago, there are no things. These things are in your mind. And those things are actually or. And that's exactly what we relate to in terms of our Aveda, in terms of our minds. This distinction of every one of the Nesiim and what it is that they were thinking, as the Medrash goes into in great detail, the nafkamina between how do something about it. You allow flies into your house. What? Must be the neshama of a great chassid, probably.
Let's squat.
He will too. Right? So these are the things that are the elements of the original or translated into that distance between the Havdalah and the or, between the Vayar Elohim et Or Kitov Vayavdel, that Havdalah that broke away the nature of or as an intimate, is that specifically, as an intimate experience of reality, a direct and sensual experience of reality, became instead a carrier of information that created the distance that we currently feel, the alienation that we currently feel, the darkness that we currently feel. The Or Hagonas did not require Havdalah, as Rashi says in Bereshit. The Or Choshech could be Mishtamish B'Revuvia. Why? Because the Choshech was clearly part of Riyah Misofa Olamat Sofa. Today we go through hell in order to figure out in our own lives, how did all of that darkness equal anything that was Or in my life? An amazing thing. And so all of these changes, all of these issues are a completely new way of our understanding the nature of Aveda. And this becomes the special chavivus, as the Rambam says about mitzvahs ner Chanukah. He says an amazing thing. Mitzvahs ner Chanukah chaviva hi ad me'od. Amazing thing to say. If he's going to start telling us the differences in the chavivus of mitzvahs. But this is obviously the nakuda, the chavivus, as the Gemara say. Aide de ata midrasha chaviva. Because you had to work for it, because it wasn't given to you, because it was your own discovery, because it was what you made of yourself. It's chaviv to you. This is the most chaviv, ad ma'od. And therefore the or that comes from it, a person tzorech adam lizaherba. You have to be very careful to be mosif b'sheva ha'el, to be mosif in hodoya. Afilu ein lo ma yochal. Person doesn't have what to eat. Go be shoel minat tzedakah, or sell your clothes if you have to. But light those Hanukkah neros. Amazing. Lokeach shemanu matli. That's how much it means to us. And that's this depth of the personal involvement and the understanding that this is me, and only this change in understanding the nature of Aveda makes the relationship of ourselves and of Chanukah as a chinuch for the Bayit HaShlishi, and the neres, the ultimate neres, that are the Evan HaChachiva, the neres of Zechariah, and the understanding that ultimately this draws from the Aragonos that is going to become a Bayit HaShlishi. All of this is related to the uncovering of these differences in Masechet Sotah. And one of the most strange things, I'll close with this, one of the most strange things is the last piece of the Gemara. Pass me the Gemara, pass me the President's Gemara. Oh, they're both sleeping. How can I ask them? Had that same problem as the President's Gemara anyway.
I woke up.
Just in
I
time.
saw my iPad wasn't here. I think you take my
Yeah. And then you realize that it was a yad min hashamayim and a shiva einayim.
Then I realized I hadn't brought my iPad.
Yeah. It's amazing what these Pavlovian responses are. Now he wakes up with there's no iPad. Okay. So listen, remember this was the end of the Gemara that said that this Maisa of Workinus and Aristobulus, it just mentions for absolutely no reason that is obvious from the story. It just happens to mention that it was Otasha Amru. This is the Or Odam, and this was the time that it says, and this the Gemara says, as if like it's obvious to us why this would be related, that it actually happened that once we had to bring the Omer Bigagot Tzrifim and the Shtei Alechem from Bikat Ein Socher. What does that have to do with anything? But the truth is, in Menachos, this story is the story of Psachia ala Kinim. Kinim. Psachia ala Kinim. So who is Psachia? Psachia is actually Mordechai. Mordechai, hundreds of years later. Bolel Shanot v'Dorshan. After I was in Bob, he was the one that was the Sapper in Shiva Moshe. And so, turns out, weird story. They didn't know where they were going to find the Omer, wherever they were staying, Alechem. And this guy who couldn't talk, so he puts his hands on his eye, or covers his head. There's all kinds of pantomimes. And Mordechai says to them, is there a place called Socher Ayin or Ein Socher? Yes, there is. That must be it. Okay, crazy story, right? This is Psachli manages to be Psachli, opens up the languages that aren't even spoken. So he figures out what the guy must be saying. Cute game. But what in the heck is he doing here? But the truth is that this is the remez that begins with the remez in that same Haftarah. And that Haftarah is Nibas Liyom Ktanot, with which the daf begins. That is the story of the Neros of Zechariah. But the Neros of Zechariah is a story of a Nevi'us that Zechariah has in the second year of Artachshata. Second year of Artachshata was the time at which mafsik the binyan of the Beis HaMikdash. And the Mi Baz Liyom Ktanot, says the Radak, is a reference to that entire period in which Zedvar Hashem is Zerubbabel, in which everybody made fun of the small beginnings, the Katnut. What is ridiculous? This is going to be a Beis HaMikdash. This is a joke. And we know that even at the end, when they finally managed to finish building the Beis HaMikdash and Ezra came down, so this is anybody who remembered the Beit HaMikdash from his youth, they were crying, and it was more crying because it was so upset. This is what we've been waiting for a geula of a shack and a piece of garbage and a complete dependency on the goyim, and it's horrifying, just horrifying. I mean, it's like the breaking all of your dreams. Yeah, well, mi baz liyom ktanot. You have no idea what something like this can grow into. So the Even, Parosha, that's all that this is, baby. It's like a foundation stone or a keystone. But this is Aleven HaChashiva Einayim Einei Hashem D'Rameshotato B'chol Haaretz. And Zedvar Hashem L'Zerubbabel. And what happens? Now, when the bayis is built, Tishuot, Chen La, which becomes Chanuka, what in the world is the connection between these things? You're talking about a period of hundreds and hundreds of years here. I mean, what's going on? We're taking all of this time as if they're one and the same thing. One is Purim-oriented, one is Chanukah-oriented. As we saw in the learning Nehemiah together. Now, the Indian over there is that Nehemiah had his entire stance, his entire understanding was defined by Zechariah. That's where he was. He became Hatarshata for that Artachshata because he became the one that was able to drink that wine. And as he says himself, Vani b'Shushana Bira. And in his being at Shushana Bira ends up building a Beis HaMikdash, which at the very end had in it Shar Shushan, as the Gemara says, in order to know where it is that we came from. Which means that he's being mischaver over here between these two inyanim, Purim and Chanukah. And that, the Rambam says, La halacha, an amazing thing. First of all, it's Hilchos Purim and Chanukah. But when he talks about the bracha on the menorah, he says, yeah, the bracha on the menorah, that's like the bracha on the Megillah. Hashem shel avarcha al kriyat Megillah, yevarcha al adlakas haner. What are you talking about? Because these are a single period of the integration of what needs to be done for the Gid Anasha. One is the Zohar sees as the left leg, and one is the right leg, and one is Keneged Moshe, one is Keneged Aaron, and one is Keneged Netzach, and one is Keneged Oid. But these are the tikkunim that need to be, and the Masechet should end with such a thing. It's absolutely crazy, throwing it in like as a comment on the side. So what we need to do is we need to understand how this change becomes part of every act that we do. We need to define properly this new connection of the Mikdash and the Menorah and the Kahuna and the Havdalah of Chanuka that makes it different from any of the other Havdalahs up until that time in terms of the Havdalah being Salam. We need to define the type of Havdalah that makes it possible for each of us to be connected to the type of Hodaya that leads to Tshuva, because ultimately Chanukah is meant to be, as the Mefarshim point out, the end of Rosh Hashanah and Yasser Simei Teshuvah and a time of Tikkun. That's why it's Hodaya. Deep, careful for that picture. The deepest meaning of Hodaya, of course, is the Tov Lahodas LaHashem of Adam Arishim, which is Tshuva Gemura. And that is the only thing that leads to the Bayis HaShlishim. So these are also the Parshias, not only of these things, but the same way that Yaakov Avinu leaves the city, he ends up in Luz. Ulam Luz Shema Ir L'Rishonah. That Luz becomes the mocker, as we learned over here, of the Din of Levaya, of Orchim, which is the issue that's involved in the Egel Arufa, which is the Leviatchin of Yaakov and Yosef, which has many, many sugyas that are the same, whether Eid Echad is kosher, what's the din of Psulei Eidos, how do they interrelate in terms of numbers, Bachlokas with Ula, and with Rabbi Nechemia, and all, exactly the same sugyas, to the point where Rashi says, look, I already explained this back when I gave Satan. I'm going to tell you the whole thing. Look over there. It's exactly the same sugya, word for word. So it is indeed. What is Egel Arufa? What is Satan? But it's exactly this Nakuda. It ends up in all crazy places. The Rambam says the most amazing thing, that this din of Levaya of a guest is a chok shechakak Avram Avinu. Where in the world was this a chok shechakak Avram? Because he was malava the Malachim when they were going to Sodom. Oh my gosh! So this is then that's where HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, this becomes part of his derech Hashem. These were the very malachim that the Medrash says were the ones that were in Machanayim that went along with Yaakov Avinu, and the first time that they were allowed back up was then, and this became, of course, the Maisa in Sodom, which was in the beginning the first step towards Mashiach, as the Medrash puts it over here, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was creating Or Shel Mashiach, and becomes the town of Luz, which is the raya of the tremendous schar, says the Gemara inside, tremendous schar for Levoy. Why? Because this one guy points out how to get into Luz. He was Malava Yisrael into Luz. Because of that, he's able to create the new city of Luz, in which even the Malach HaMavis doesn't have a shus to come in. And Basan Cherev v'lo Bilbala. Nebuchadnezzar came. He wasn't able to be Kovesh Luz. This becomes Tchias HaMesim, which is Keneged Luz, which is Keneged what? Modim. So that's the one part in a human being. If he's bends for Modim, then he's Shaykh to Tchiyah. If not, the Luz is lost. And that becomes now all of the Ramazim over here, from Yitziat Tzadik Min Ha'ir, the Ramazim to Dosan of the 470 years that it's going to take to get back there. It's Israel from that very moment. Megurei Aviv, which is Maramis to 259 years exactly from the moment that they were told the Eitz Hamuka of Hebron, which is Geri Yezaracha. And this becomes all of the Ramazim that we have over here, the Shemen of the Pachim Ketanim, and the Shemen al Rosha, and the Levaya, and the Chalom of the Nebuchadnezzar, and Daniel, and Paro, and Yosef, and Yaakov's Chalomos, and the Chalomos of the Sarah Mashkim, and the Sarah Ophim, and the Shlosha Serigim, and the various levels of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the way that he's Makzif Eved al Adonav and Adonav al Eved, and he got it, the Yosef, and the Ruach of Hashem, which becomes the Yesod of the Bayit, and the Nizgav Hashem Levado B'Isai Hayoim, and in the end, Abaim Yashresh Yaakov, which leads us out of Sefer Bereshis, the seeds of Yisrael, the Parach Yisrael, the filling the entire earth with Morocco. Kol Tevel becomes filled with that outgrowth of Snuva, which comes from the story that here begins with the Mi Bazli Om Tanot, we'll have to look into as to how that actually becomes the core of these distinctions. That will be in the second part, which we will come back to after everyone escapes, if anyone is left, and after we daven Meir. So I will say to you good evening. Once again, thank our hosts for the part one. We'll expect another meal for part two, otherwise we can't keep going. Midnight snack. Midnight snack. Okay, and I hope some of you out there, some of those ships at sea will
Burning
come back
midnight
again.
oil.